If the function of ideology is not to produce knowledge, then what is the role or function of an ideology in our society? That becomes an important question to answer. If it would not be producing knowledge, what would ideology then be doing? For example, Louis Althusser writes that ideology is indeed a system of representations, but in the majority of cases, these representations have nothing to do with consciousness. They are usually images and occasionally concepts, but it is above all as structures that they impose on the vast majority of men, not via their consciousness. They are perceived, accepted, suffered cultural objects, and they act functionally on men via a process that escapes them. Now, why does ideology not produce knowledge becomes clear from this definition. It is because ideology does not function on the principle of conscious critical thinking. It works on the principle or fundamental of unconscious perceive and accept model. When does knowledge get produced? Knowledge is produced when human beings put in efforts, critical efforts, when they stop, think, and act. But ideology does not produce this kind of environment. This kind of environment is produced by science, wherein scientific analysis is important. There, if a person has to say anything, has to come to a particular conclusion, he would go through logical reasoning. But when we have to create something out of ideology or accept something out of ideology, it would be based on the principle of unconscious reaction to a particular discourse, and that reaction would be based on the principle of obviousness, on the principle of, say for example, popular culture, on the principle of accepted notion, on the principle of majority. If most of the people think it to be correct, it must be correct, so we need not to think a lot about it, let's accept it. This is how ideology works. It works on the method of perceive and accept. You see something and you accept it. For example, you see someone with a particular hairstyle, isn't it? You like that hairstyle because you see that aesthetic, you see that good, so you would just adopt it. Now, adopting that particular ideology needs no conscious efforts, needs no critical thinking. Wearing a particular kind of dress, speaking in a particular manner, reacting to a particular situation in a particular way where our conscious mind does not act, all these are done through ideology. Now, what then is the function of this ideology? It is to make fool of most of the people, would be in a layman sense. Because if we are acting unconsciously, if we are acting without critical thinking, if we are acting, just see and see on the principle of see and act, see and accept, this is what ideology creates. So it creates a different world from science. The world of science would be based on the critical thinking, and the world of ideology would be based on mere aesthetics, mere liking. I see something, I like it, I adopt it without thinking whatever I am adopting or accepting is good for me or not. So then what are these discourses? What is this ideology? Ideology is also not a particular discourse. It's not one discourse, but these are the streams of discourses. These are various discourses which prevail in our society at every time, and all these discourses go in parallel. For example, there would be a political discourse, there would be a religious discourse, there would be a moral discourse, there would be a fashion discourse, there would be an educational discourse, there would be a competition discourse, there would be hairstyle discourse, there would be dress code discourse, there would be the figure, your body discourse, and all these discourses, they are there in our society, present every time. The discourse of relationships and all these things. So what we actually do, we imbibe all those discourses as per our liking. So we would act on our figure, we would act on our hairstyle, we would act on our dress, we would act on our goggles, we would act on our shoes, we would act the way we speak, we would act the way we go out in the market. All these things would, all these activities of ours would be based on these discourses, and we would eventually like all these discourses and move ahead with them. So ideology creates discourses, and those discourses are accepted by the people as they perceive them, as they see them. Therefore, in the contemporary times, ideology works mostly through media. The representations, the images, the advertisements that you see in media influence our lives, and we easily accept them as a way of living. And then they would become our lived experiences. We would experience them, we would act upon those ideologies. So what ideology would be doing, it would help us in understanding the discourse. Now there is another thing that Louis Althusser talks in theory of ideology, and he would talk about historical materialism. Historical materialism will also be a part of ideology, will also be a part of discourse. But Althusser says that the function of historical materialism or this ideology would be to help us understand our material existence. Now you need to understand these two things. The material existence and the real existence of a human being are two different things. And here will we understand the difference, how ideology constitutes the real relation, or our constitutes our lived experiences and imaginary relationship. That will become clear here. What is our material existence? Our material existence would be, say for example, there is a laborer. Okay. He is working in a company, he is working in a factory. So he would understand his world, he would think that his world is all about competition, all about shrewdness, all about being skilled. If he has all these elements, there is an opportunity for him, there is an option for him to get for example promoted, to get better salary, to go ahead of his competitors. So he would think that my whole world is this, that is being competitive, being skilled, being shrewd, getting the hold of the opportunities, moving ahead, getting promotion, getting increments, getting bonus. That is all his world would be. On the other hand, if there is a person, say for example, is a student, how would he understand his material world? His material world would be based on the competition with his classmates, getting 90% marks, getting an admission in a better school or a better college, and getting a better job. That would be the material existence. And historical materialism, the science of historical materialism, says Louis Althusser, helps us in understanding this particular reality, this particular world. But there is a problem with this ideology, this identification of ideology. And he says that when through ideology we recognize ourselves, or through this historical materialism we recognize ourselves. For example, we have recognized, a student recognizes that this is what he is supposed to do, a businessman recognizes what he is supposed to do, so he thinks that he has recognized his existence. But Louis Althusser says, in essence, in reality, this recognition is basically a misrecognition. This is misrecognition. And that is why earlier Althusser said that the function of ideology is not to produce knowledge. Because knowledge is that which leads us to reality, which leads us to recognition. But ideology produces a kind of knowledge of ourselves where we recognize ourselves, but that recognition is actually a misrecognition. Therefore, Louis Althusser tells you and me that ideology works on the principle of allusion, ALLUSION, and illusion, ILLUSION. Allusion means reference. He says that ideology would allude to historical reality, wherein in a certain way, through a certain knowledge, it helps us to relate ourselves to the historical reality, or to our world, to our historical world, where we think that we are very much close to the reality. But simultaneously it would have an illusion to the real conditions of existence. It will elude us, ILLUDE. It would take us away from our real conditions of existence. That is why he said that it also creates an imaginary world, an imaginary relationship to the real conditions of existence. And through ideology, people only leave this imaginary relationship. They do not leave the real relationship. They leave this imaginary relationship. How do they leave this imaginary relationship? For example, a student thinks his world is all about getting good marks. For example, a person who is in a factory, a worker, thinks his whole world is all about producing good quality products, getting promotion, getting an increment. Now, this is not his world, and this is not the world of child. But if the student and a worker have understood their world, that their world is all about getting marks and their world is all about getting promotion, this is an imaginary world. This is an imaginary world. And this is the illusion, ILLUSION, from the real conditions of existence. Because real conditions, his real existence is way different from getting simply 90% marks and thinking all about them and thinking कि कल मुझे लोग पहचानेंगे कैसे कि इसने डिस्टिंक्शन ली थी, इसने पोजीशन ली थी, ठीक। और एक वर्कर समझेगा कि मुझे कैसे लोग पहचानेंगे कि मैं एडिडास कंपनी में काम करता हूं और एडिडास में मेरी इतनी सैलरी है, एडिडास में मुझे इतनी कम इंक्रीमेंट्स दी, इतना बोनस। दैट इज मटेरियल एक्सिस्टेंस एंड दैट इज इमेजिनरी वर्ल्ड, दैट इज इमेजिनरी रिलेशन. This is how ideology would elude us, would create that illusion to our real existence of the world. Therefore, Althusser says that this world works, this ideology works on the fundamental of recognition, which is actually a misrecognition, and an illusion, which is basically